Prime Minister Justin Trudeau speaking mainly today about the Large Employer Emergency Financing Facility, or LEAF, as you will hear it called. That's the new acronym for that. Companies, of course, hoping to secure financing from it must meet certain criteria, certain guidelines. We talked about that before the news conference, but the Prime Minister reiterated that. He also said this is not a blank check. This is not a bailout. This is bridge financing, and he prefers companies find private liquidity, but of course, this is a last resort for companies that have a lot of employees who still need to put food on the table. Let's bring in our David Akin. And Trudeau was asked, David, about the oil and gas sector, if the oil and gas sector could benefit from this, because as you've been saying for weeks, the Prime Minister of the government had said there's an announcement coming in days and days. So is that announcement, or is there something extra coming?
Yeah, so I mean, we have calls out now to see if for example, organizations like the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers are okay with this. I suspect they will, that there will be major oil and gas producers who do have, believe it or not, environmental plans, sustainability plans. Remember, the province of Alberta's environment plan is in line with the federal government's plan, so much so that there's no federal carbon tax imposed on Alberta. It's different in Saskatchewan. So the province of Saskatchewan is not in line with the federal government's plan, and so the federal government imposes a carbon tax on Saskatchewan. But just thinking about those based in Alberta, up in the oil sands in Fort Mac, those companies, if they chose, could come to the government and say, we need some bridge financing. And this is not so much for employees necessarily right now. The point of the LEAF, and that's the new acronym, is to make sure that that business is there to employ people when it returns. A better example on that front might be, as I said before the press conference, a national clothing retailer. It's not an essential business. It's a clothing retailer inside a mall, so you can't do curbside pickup as we see in some provinces. So it's essentially shut down. You want to make sure that retailer is still a going concern, and it needs a loan that it's going to maybe look to the federal government for. And one other thing I think is important to point out here, Farah, what did the federal government do? It was the Harper government at the time in 2008 and 2009. It took an equity stake in an auto firm, GM, when auto firms were having so much trouble. So in other words, the taxpayer actually became part of an owner. That was an option, or remains an option, for the current federal government. Do we want the federal government to take an ownership stake and say, the various airlines, various retailers, oil and gas firms? The government clearly saying, no, that's not the option it wants to take right now. Instead, it's asking individual firms who can't get money from their bank, come see us. You're going to have to show us your financial structure. Can be no share buyback programs, no dividends can be paid out. You can't be increasing CEO pay. But if you're ready to do what it takes to make sure the business is going to be there for post-pandemic, then we're ready to talk.
Yeah, I just want to note about retail. You mentioned retail, and we saw J. Crew, we saw Neiman Marcus south of the border. Both of them went under because of all of this and potentially what's been going on before. But let's talk about those conditions that you mentioned, because I really liked Global News producer Brian Mullen's question. He asked about putting safeguards on dividends and share buybacks.
Right. So again, my sense, and again, details still sound like they're very much to be worked out. But when every company is going to be different. So let's take a national hotel chain, for example. We know, I think Marriott, there's a hotel chain that says its average room revenue was down 90% because nobody's staying in hotels. So let's say a hotel chain says, I still got to pay a mortgage. I still got to pay interest on the mortgage. I still got to keep up the properties. All those things I need money for. I have no revenue. So let's say the hotel chain comes to the government and would work out a very specific deal. And at that time, that's when the government would say, okay, a hotel chain owner, I want to make sure you're not doing this, not paying back dividends. You've never been a tax evader. Remember, it's legal in Canada to try to avoid tax. It's illegal to evade tax. Key distinction. In any event, the point of Brian's question, I think, is, if I read between the lines, is to say that each company is going to be a little bit different. Each company is going to have to commit to different things. One of the questions that Finance Minister Bill Morneau got asked this morning, and I'd like to hear more about this, is what about telling taxpayers about these deals? In other words, if you do a deal with the hotel chain, will we get to know what that deal is? Typically, when the government lends money to a big company, it doesn't tell us the conditions. This has been the history of Bombardier, for example, all through the years. We know that the Bombardiers got federal money. We've never known the conditions. We don't even know if Bombardier repaid the federal taxpayer. So I think one of the key things going forward is going to be, you need to tell us about the deals, and we need to know if people repaid them. We need to know how much individual firms got, not just ballpark how much this whole program cost.